A safe space. That's where we find ourselves in the midst of one of these places. The hum of fluorescent lights, the patterned carpet of an empty hallway, the blue glow of a sign long past its function. These are not destinations, yet they feel like somewhere we were always meant to be. They sit in the threshold between the real and the imagined, where familiarity turns faint and nostalgia begins to distort. The term liminal comes from the Latin limen, meaning threshold. In anthropology, it describes the middle stage of a ritual, the part where one identity has been shed, but the next has not yet formed. It's a space of becoming, a temporary suspension of definition. Today, we've reimagined that concept visually, through pictures of deserted hallways, closed arcades, or neon-lit rooms with no visible exit. In a time when our culture constantly pushes towards motion, these still frames have become strangely magnetic. Various writers and journalists have suggested that our fascination stems from comfort, that we find reassurance in the stillness and emptiness of these places. They point to how liminal imagery acts as a mirror of our own modern condition, connected yet displaced, nostalgic yet unsure of what we're nostalgic for. That insight captures something fundamental. These spaces embody the emotion of waiting, and waiting has become the natural rhythm of our lives. To understand our attachment, we need to look inward. Liminal spaces tap into one of the oldest psychological states, the transitional self. When we move from one chapter of life to another, childhood to adulthood, presence to absence, there's always an in-between that feels undefined. These spaces externalize that feeling. A school hallway at night or a shuttered convenience store at 3 a.m. evokes an emotion of limbo. The setting is known, but the context is gone. What remains is pure atmosphere, a place stripped of purpose, reduced to existence. That reduction is soothing. It reflects a form of emotional clarity where all the noise of meaning falls away. There's also a neurological link. The uncanny familiarity of liminal imagery triggers partial memory recall, sensations of déjà vu or false memory known as cryptomnesia. The brain recognizes patterns of color, texture, and layout that resemble hundreds of real places we've seen. But because it cannot locate that exact source, it creates a soft dissonance, a half memory. That in-betweenness is satisfying in the same way unresolved music can be beautiful. The mind rests in uncertainty because it feels alive there. Every liminal space is a map of memory. The geometry, lighting, and emptiness recreate how memory itself functions. Fragmented, distorted, but persistent. Think of the fluorescent light in a school bathroom, the echo of a stairwell, or the dull orange hue of a motel lobby. These are the details that memory saves, not the people or events tied to them. Our love for these spaces is rooted in recognition of that architecture. It's a confrontation with the foundations of nostalgia, stripped of story, leaving only texture. The emotional comfort comes from the ability to exist in a past that's been reduced to abstraction. There are no expectations, no timelines, only presence. Liminal images online, especially those associated with dreamcore or nostalgia core aesthetics, are powerful because they capture emotion as spatial design. They aren't photographs of places, they're photographs of feelings. Each hallway or parking lot becomes a stage where the viewer's personal history performs quietly in the background. One of the most striking traits of liminal imagery is the total lack of human presence. But that absence doesn't imply fear or hostility. It suggests permission. Without others, we are allowed to exist without judgment. The camera no longer observes us. It observes the space. The moment becomes about being, not performing. This absence is therapeutic in its own way. In a social and digital space where identity is curated in public, liminal environments feel private, even sacred. They restore a sense of solitude that modern life often denies. There's a psychological parallel here with anemoia, the nostalgia for a time we've never lived. These places seem to exist in that dimension, untouched by culture, suspended before or after human activity. That sensation, rather than fear, often feels like peace. Liminality distorts time. These spaces feel timeless, not because they're ancient, but because they seem unanchored. There's no clock on the wall, no visible sky, no forward motion. That temporal isolation becomes comforting in a world addicted to acceleration. Everything about modern life demands velocity, productivity, relevance, constant connection. Yet here is a photograph of stillness, and it commands attention precisely because it refuses to move. The digital generation, raised in constant flux, finds emotional refuge in these pauses. A mall corridor for the 1990s, captured in grainy yellow light, gives us something the present rarely allows: a quiet intermission. We don't want the mall, the hallway, or the gas station itself. We want the moment between them, the eternal pause before meaning resumes. In that pause, the world feels safe again. There's an irony in how these places have become primarily experienced online. We explore the unreal through the unreal, images of physical emptiness inside a digital feed. This recursive relationship between reality and simulation deepens the emotional response. These spaces remind us of the tactile world, yet we only reach them through screens. The more we scroll, the more they resemble a kind of memory of the physical. One article notes that liminality reflects how our generation exists between realities, the physical one we inherited and the digital one we inhabit. These images are not merely aesthetic curiosities, but emotional reflections of that shift. They give shape to our collective dislocation. The backrooms, analog horror, dreamcore videos, all of these are ways of exploring the comfort and discomfort of digital existence. They transform the liminal from a psychological state into a cultural one. Perhaps the most powerful reason we love liminal space is that they never finish. They invite imagination rather than closure. A photograph of an empty lobby or dead mall doesn't tell us what happened. It asks us to wonder. The absence of narrative is liberating. Human beings are drawn to the incomplete because completion signals finality, an ending. The unfinished, on the other hand, allows presence to continue indefinitely. The same instinct that draws us to liminal spaces also drives art, dreaming, and philosophy. We linger in ambiguity because it allows us to explore meaning without resolution. To love liminal spaces, then, is to love the moment before understanding, the point where emotion and perception coexist without explanation. Liminality exists everywhere, not just in architecture or memory, but in every transition of life. The space between wakefulness and sleep, childhood and adulthood, grief and acceptance. These are all thresholds we cross quietly, often without realizing. When we look at a picture of an empty school hallway or an abandoned pool, we recognize ourselves standing between worlds. The fascination becomes less about the space and more about what it represents: change, impermanence, and the human need to pause before moving on. Our love for these images isn't nostalgia for a lost past. It's reverence for an act of becoming, the quiet middle ground where transformation begins. Liminal spaces are not haunted by ghosts or mystery. They're haunted by time. They hold what is past and what is yet to arrive, and in doing so, they give us a glimpse of peace within transition. They remind us that beauty often lives not in endings or beginnings, but in the silent passage between them. So, what do liminal spaces mean to you? And as always, thank you for watching.